Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
You can support this podcast on patreon.com/First Paw Media.
On today's episode, we interview the author of the new book, Sit, Stay, Heal, What Dogs Can Teach Us About Living Well by Dr. Renee Alsarraf. Dr. Renee is a veterinary oncologist and takes care of dogs with cancer. The book is about her own journey with cancer and how the remarkable power of dogs can help us navigate even the toughest situations. In the interview, I mentioned that the book was released in August, but at the time of the release, it is available wherever you buy your books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and others. Be sure to check out Dr. Renee on socials and on our website. The links are available on our show notes. Without further ado, Dr. Renee Alsarraf.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by Alaska Dog Works Professional Canine Training Center in Anchorage, Alaska. This is Dog Works Radio, committed to families and their dogs to build lifelong and fulfilling relationships. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert and Michelle Forto.
Hello and welcome. I am Robert and I'm here with Dr. Renee. How are you today?
I am fine. I am so excited to be on your show. Thank you so much, Robert. And I am certainly a fan of Dog Works Radio.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm excited to talk about your brand new book today. But before we jump in, Renee, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're all about, please?
Sure. So I am a veterinary oncologist. I don't know if everyone knows, but there are specialty services in veterinary medicine. So after becoming a veterinarian, I went on to do an internship and then a residency in medical oncology. You then have to take a series of tests over about 2 years, have a published paper, doing some research, things like that. And for the past 30 so years, I have been in private practice treating cancer in small animals, primarily dogs and cats, but occasionally a ferret or a rabbit, even a bird. And I, as you know, have recently written a book sort of about that journey.
Yeah, and that definitely is a path we're going to jump down here in a little bit. Renee, can you tell us a little bit about canine cancer in particular? I know as a dog trainer and as a dog musher, we've seen it a bunch come up with our clients and, of course, with our own dogs. It is very prevalent and has been for decades, hasn't it?
It has. I always say that I would love to be out of business if there was no more cancer. I do believe that we are seeing more and more cancer in pets. In part, it's also because dogs and cats are living longer than they used to. If you remember in the 70s, dogs would get parvovirus or things that we did not have vaccines for, communicable diseases that were very scary and could be terminal. Nowadays, dogs have better nutrition. More cats are kept indoors, so they don't have as many of the elements or cat fights or, heaven forbid, being hit by a car outside. And as we all age, we have an increased propensity for getting cancer, which is scary.
It is scary. And of course, in your book, you're navigating these journeys with your clients and how to best deal with that. But of course, it's obviously a very scary situation because obviously dogs they're members of our family. They're our best friends. And we definitely want to do whatever we can to take the best care for them. How is that best approached when you talk with a client and you say, okay, Max has cancer. This is where we're at. What are some of the first questions that they have? Because obviously this is a scenario that most pet owners aren't familiar with.
Right. And, Robert, that is so true. People, though, come in with a preconceived notion of what treating cancer is like. Perhaps their uncle or their aunt went through terrible side effects from cancer treatment, and certainly nobody wants to do that to their cat or dog. Fortunately, dogs do so much better with chemotherapy or radiation therapy than we ever do. Only about 15% of dogs ever get sick from chemotherapy, which means 85% have no side effects. I jokingly say that your next door neighbor's dog could be on chemotherapy and you'd have no idea. I've treated dogs that have still shown in the confirmation ring. I've treated dogs that are agility or obedience champions. I've actually had a dog that years ago was on the David Letterman show for stupid pet tricks. And I've had many dogs that work as either seeing eye dogs or work for the police in some capacity. And thankfully, they don't miss a beat. I think the important thing, though, in talking to owners is to answer all of their questions, right? To teach them all about the cancer, the biologic behavior, what the treatment options are, and what success looks like, right? How much will that help their dog? And then the most important thing, and I think we do this a lot in veterinary medicine, sometimes perhaps more than in human medicine, is we take into account the entire family dynamic and the emotions that are behind this.
Yeah, that is a key component, because often you have the little kids that are involved, and that's their best friend, that's their buddy, and when we're dealing with the human side of it, often they know mom or dad or grandma or grandpa are sick, but they aren't necessarily involved from day one, are they?
Correct. That's a good point.
So one more question about sort of the history of cancer in dogs in particular. Do they get the many different types of cancer that we get, or is there one type that is really prevalent in dogs?
So dogs do get just as many cancers in general as people do. The most common cancer, though, is a type called lymphoma or lymphosarcoma. That is a cancer that generally arises from the lymph node or the lymphocyte cell. It can quickly spread or first show up in the spleen or the liver, sometimes the bone marrow. Dogs actually do get one cancer that thankfully people don't get, and it is called a transmissible venereal tumor. And it's just as the name implies, it's actually a contagious cancer that can be spread through coitus, or say if a male dog has his nose somewhere that he shouldn't.
Wow, I'd never heard of that one before. That's interesting for sure. So let's jump over to your own journey. As we mentioned, Renee, you've been doing veterinary work for a long time. I believe you said about 30 years, and you specialize in this cancer treatment and, of course, working with their clients. But about this same time, you had your own scare with cancer, and of course that journey led you down this path to write this book. And a big character in your book is your dog Newton. What would you like to share about your own journey before we jump into the book?
It was hard. It was scary. Many people said, the irony of the veterinary oncologist who battles cancer every day for her canine patients is now having to battle it for herself. I was able to draw on the life lessons that I learned from our canine patients, and I was even able to draw, I would say, support and strength from my own dog, Newton. The double whammy was that while I was going through therapy myself, Newton developed lymphoma.
Wow. Yeah, and that truly is the double whammy. And according to the info that I got, thankfully you're in remission right now, and things are going well, yes?
Yes, you can't see me, no one can see me, but I am knocking on wood, which is my head. Thankfully, everything is well. Thank you for asking.
Well, that's great news. So when did you get started on this book? Can you give us a time frame of sort of the preparation for it and the writing process and all of that?
Sure. So, just like so many people that I meet that say, oh my goodness, I've always wanted to be a veterinarian. Likewise, I had always thought in my head, in my second life, I would love to write a book. But I'm sure so many of us say that. Being a veterinarian, though, is more than just a job. It is all consuming, or at least it is for me, right? It's my identity. It is all encompassing in terms of everything that I do every day. So I never ever thought of doing anything else or having time to do anything else. Unfortunately, I got that pause by getting, as I like to call it, the C word, with the middle finger in the air. And at the time, that was back in 2018, I was the poster child. Everything was fine. And I went to just a routine annual checkup. And unfortunately, they discovered cancer. At that time, I did no social media. And so I decided to email my 75 of my closest friends, because I couldn't stand talking to each one of them on the phone and giving them updates. It was too draining. And so every couple of weeks, I would send out an email to all of these people. Some of them were my son's parents' friends, because I figured they should know if, I am laying on the sofa not looking so good or without hair. And what was very supportive in my journey is so many people would write back encouraging words. But in addition, they also wrote back, have you ever thought about writing a book? You really should think about writing a book. Of course, I blew them all off. One of those people is a very prominent literary agent in New York City. And she said, you really should think about writing a book. Still blew them all off. I finished treatment. Periodically, I might see these same people in the grocery store, and they still were very encouraging about that. Of course, I blew them off again. And then my husband and I decided to go just for a long weekend to a lovely hotel and resort in Rhode Island. And lo and behold, one morning, the newspaper came. My favorite part are the comics and the horoscopes. So I opened it up and I read my horoscope, True Science, and it literally said, you should start writing your book today. And I kid you not, 2 days later, I started to write.
And that is sometimes the nudge we need, isn't it?
It is. That one was more like being hit over the head by the universe, and I accepted. It was great.
Here's to the great American dog trainers out there. The hundreds of you who settled for the sometimes thankless job of working with four-legged companions because they pay the bills. Of course, there's something else you could do if you've got something to say. Start a podcast with First Paw Media and unleash your creative freedom. Maybe even earn enough money to tell yourself, hey, I'm no puppy wrangler, I'm a rover, I'm a trail breaker, I'm an adventurer. Visit firstpaw.media. Wag on over today.
I'm sitting here sort of laughing when you say everybody has the aspirations to write that book. I don't know how many times I have said, yep, I'm going to do it. It's time to sit down and put the pen to paper, so to speak, and get out the next greatest dog training manual or novel or whatever is under the radar, so to speak. So how did you come up with the format of writing this? As we mentioned, it sort of tells the story of different clients that you had, and of course their journey and what we can learn from that. Out of all the clients that you had, unfortunately, in your work, how did you choose who was going to be in the book and what made their story special compared to others, etc.?
Oh my gosh, Robert, that is such a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. On some level, it was hard. And it was hard because there were so many. Before I started writing, I sat down and I just created a list of all the clients that made such a great impression. And then to narrow that list I used sort of that measuring stick of what that life lesson was. Sometimes the clients just really were very touching, but there wasn't necessarily a life lesson, or my heart went out to them. Some of my clients come because they've lost either a father or a mother or a child. And this dog is their last link to that spouse or their child. And so they want to do everything they can to still keep that dog alive, assuming that they have such great quality. Those are incredibly touching stories. Maybe not so much life lessons, but still very touching. But that's sort of how I pared down that list, although I still have so many other stories about, specific patients and what we can all learn from them. And then I just really started writing, thinking, if I tell each dog's story, each chapter becomes its own story or even its own episode, if you will. And then it was suggested to me about weaving my story a little more heavily through that, all of those chapters, just to create more cohesiveness versus individual stories about patients.
It's interesting when you said that there sometimes is that link. You had mentioned possibly mom or dad, or unfortunately the child has passed, and they have this dog or this cat or this pet that they have, and that's their last connection. And the remaining family, of course, want to uphold that memory, especially if other kids are involved. How do you make it realistic, especially for the kids, that Max or Rover or whomever is very sick and they may pass on? How do you keep the family focused and the goals realistic with your clients?
I think it is twofold. The first is to be completely upfront with gentle honesty, telling the families everything to expect, the percentages, the odds, because we can't make a good educated decision for our families without that information. You have to take into account their finances. You have to take into account, can the family drive back and forth enough to come to see you for the chemotherapy or the radiation? Can the family weather side effects and sort of what their risk tolerance is? Thankfully, the whole goal in veterinary oncology is quality of life. At times, that might be a little different than human medicine, not saying that human medicine isn't about quality of life, but in human medicine, they are striving more for a cure, whereas in veterinary medicine, we sometimes know that a cure is not possible. But if we can give another year or another summer or even another couple years of good quality of life, that's the most important thing. So perhaps our doses aren't as high as they would be for a person to receive. The other part is, because we strive for quality of life, the only reason to continue is if that dog is feeling well, not if the dog is in the hospital sick. So in general, most families, once their dog is on chemotherapy, don't notice a difference when they're at home. Or they actually say, wow, my dog has more energy than it's had the last 6 months. I just thought my dog was getting older or perhaps had arthritis. And then they finally realize, oh my goodness, I think it's the cancer that had been taking a toll on the energy level. When it comes to kids, I always use caution, right? It is not my position or my place to say how much a child should know or not know. If a pet parent brings in their dog and brings in small children, I always try to talk very carefully and take the lead of that mom or dad when talking about it.
And you're so right when you had mentioned that finances are a huge part of these decisions, especially when you're thinking about long-term prognosis and quality of life and all that. And that is much different than human medicine, because often the veterinarian is not only the medical provider, but they're also, they're the everything. They are the psychologist. They are the money manager. They're everything when you're sitting with your patients in the exam room or in the office or whatever. How do you tell them what is best on that term? Of course, everybody's situation is different. Some people have more tolerance for financial commitments than others. How do you approach that, especially when you're dealing with an entire family unit?
So some people actually want me to make that decision for their families. And the one sort of hard, fast rule I always have is that I can't, because I don't know about all those different factors: money, emotions, ability to come, other things that are going on in the family. But I do believe that the more a client or a pet parent is educated, the more I can teach them about the cancer, how it progresses, what it does, and what we can do to help, the easier it will be for that person to sit with that information and make that decision. I also believe that it is a family decision. Sometimes we'll get the husband and the wife that are on completely opposite sides. And I suggest go home just for an overnight. You can come back in a day, no charge, but you really need to think about this. This isn't like antibiotics. We can't really take it back once we give chemotherapy. And it's important to have as little or as few regrets as possible. Treating cancer can sometimes be an emotional roller coaster. There is a lot that kind of even goes into that backstory. The last point is, and I think we can all take this for anything that we do, is instead of sitting across from someone and having a conversation, is we should sit next to them and have a conversation side by side, to get to know them, so they feel comfortable and they know that their veterinarian or their friend is on their side, helping them to make that decision. But ultimately, that decision is theirs to make. Sometimes, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, Renee, these are just such good tips. It's been years since we've had somebody on to talk about canine cancer and sort of the process that a family goes through. I just want to thank you so much for sharing these tips and tricks, if you will, because I think it's such an important topic.
Oh, thank you so very much. I'm happy to, come on another time if that helps you and your listeners. What I was lastly going to say, sometimes you don't find out the real impetus or what's really driving the family until, heaven forbid, that dog is no longer with us. I had a gentleman who was absolutely lovely, extremely quiet. He brought in his Shih Tzu religiously for about 1.75 years. The dog did great. Unfortunately, closer to about 2 years, the cancer got the best of him. But every time I would talk with him, he didn't really look me in the eyes so much. He would look down at the ground. He didn't really open up so much. But we did our best to treat his dog as if he was our very own. And about 6 weeks after the pet passed, I got a very long note with some photographs. And it turned out that this little Shih Tzu had been his daughter's dog. She had passed away at the age of 23. And her Shih Tzu, the one that he brought to me, was only 5 years old. And had come down with cancer just shortly after her death. He so desperately wanted to do everything he could for that dog and give that little guy a really good quality of life. What was so sad, and I wished I had known this, was he had taken a second job to pay for chemotherapy. And sometimes chemotherapy can be expensive, and sometimes it can be, rather affordable, depending on the type of cancer and the protocol one chooses. But he had taken a second job working nights at a local grocery store, cutting cold cuts to pay for the bills. And had I known, I would have done anything in my power or to help with that. But it was just so lovely. Being a veterinary oncologist, everyone thinks is such a hard job. And on a lot of levels, it is emotionally hard. But these stories just fill you up to want to come back and help more families and their pets.
And of course, that's what the book is all about. And I would love to spend our last few minutes together, Renee, talking about some of these other stories that you have in your book. We had talked about a few times your dog, Newton, and how he was involved in your story, as well as, of course, in the story of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about Newton and maybe share another quick story or two that's in the book?
Sure. So Newton came to us as a puppy. He was always extremely quirky. But he was very steadfast for our family. And when I would come home after having chemotherapy myself for 8.5 hours, it was he who would always lay by my side, never really left me. He sort of had a different purpose for each of the members in my family. And I do believe that dogs are with us, and each dog has a different purpose in our life, even though it's terribly hard to lose one dog. When the next one comes along, perhaps they have a different purpose to be there for us. It was challenging to see him go through treatment while I was going through treatment, although he kicked butt because he fared much better, didn't have any GI issues, readily ate all of his kibble. So we all think of having our dogs as companions. I never thought that mine would be my companion through fighting cancer. You asked about perhaps another story in the book. What I found interesting is there is a chapter about a bloodhound, and it made me think of, you did an episode on Nick Carter, who was a bloodhound,
right?
And man trailing, right? And so I thought, oh my goodness, that really shows, what the bloodhound that I highlighted in the book, who is a search and rescue dog, and thankfully is still with us. Oh my goodness, 6-7 years later. But just to see how, dogs help us through so many things, right? And for that search and rescue policeman, he was his companion during that. And then that officer stuck by his bloodhound when he needed to be treated for this disease.
And bloodhounds are truly having their moment. I mean, one just won Westminster a couple of weeks ago, and of course, talking about it today and our episode that we did a few weeks ago. I as a vet, I'm sure you hear this all the time. Hopefully, a lot of people don't run out and buy bloodhounds like they typically do when they become very famous in movies like the Dalmatians and the Siberians and the Golden Retrievers and all that, right?
Oh my gosh, Robert, I applaud that. Yes, getting the dog that the president has does not make you closer to that president. I know when President Obama got his Portuguese water dog, the Portuguese water breed became much more popular, which is never good for a breed. Too many backyard breedings, some recessive genes, and that can sometimes be the downfall of a breed. Bloodhounds are fantastic. They are certainly not for every family or even a lot of families. Yes.
And that is something we talk about a lot on our show is trying to educate potential pet owners on that aspect as well. Renee, lastly, you had talked about Newton being your your companion that helped you out, the therapy dog, if you will. That is sort of a dog's job, if you will. You had mentioned that is their purpose is for them not only to be our companions, of course, that's what they do best, but often they do have that job of providing some type of comfort or therapy for their owners. That's what makes them special, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, that makes them incredibly special, important in our life. Absolutely. Their unconditional love for us, their companionship, working together, right? Whether that be mushing for the sport or dogs that help farmers, work with cattle. They are indispensable in our lives, and they are completely intertwined in all of our lives.
Yeah, and sometimes there's no training required. It's just there because of that bond that we have with dogs that they just do it innately or naturally. I'm curious, are there other species that even come close? Obviously, I'm well versed in dogs, but not in other animals. Is there anything else that comes close to that relationship that we have with our dog?
Not necessarily for animal and man. Obviously, there are symbiotic relationships between animals and, birds and things like that. But I think dogs uniquely hold that number one spot well above any other species. That's for sure.
For sure.
I feel that my life is blessed and so much better because it is a life with dogs.
Hear, hear. Renee, before we go, is there anything else you want to mention? Obviously, we're going to share your book and your socials and all of that on our show notes page. I know the book is not even out till October. This show will air in late August, early September, right before your book is released. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else that you want to say? That the floor is yours.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. I don't believe so. I just want to thank you so very much for having me on your show. I appreciate your time and getting to talk and share some of my stories and life lessons. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being on. I look forward to sharing your book, your journey, and of course, we'll share any comments or questions that folks have about this episode with you. So with that, on behalf of our guest today, we will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From First Paw Media, this is DogWorks Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert and Michelle Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.